Formula One is back. The Belgian Grand Prix this weekend. We're here in the paddock to bring you all the news and excitement from this weekend and the resumption of hostilities in the Formula One World Championship. And we've already had the first big news of the second half of the season. Valtteri Bottas will remain at Mercedes next season as teammate to Lewis Hamilton. Toto Wolff, of course, has talked at length about how he had to decide between Esteban Ocon and Valtteri Bottas. The decision's made, they've gone with Bottas. I'm joined by Scott Mitchell to discuss the decision and the implications of this. So, why has Mercedes opted for Bottas?
Well, we know obviously all of what Bottas brings to the team from a driving point of view, as does Mercedes, as does everybody viewing. He's a safe pair of hands, he works really well with Lewis Hamilton, they're a good dynamic for the team. But in announcing that they'd activated their option to retain Bottas for 2020, Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff talked about having set Bottas this challenge for 2019 to up his game. He faded badly in 2018, he didn't win a race, and in Wolff's words, Bottas has risen to that challenge. He's met what's been asked of him, and I guess from Mercedes' point of view, it's that assurance of knowing what you get with Bottas, the recognition of the fact that he has done the job effectively that he's been asked to do. It's difficult to show him the exit door when he's basically done all that's asked of him, and he facilitates this environment where Hamilton's on the road to another world title and he's at the top of his game. So it kind of makes sense that there were many plus points for keeping Bottas. Bottas basically just needed to give Mercedes another reason too, and from what we've heard so far, Bottas gave them exactly that reason with his performance in the first half of the season.
But while it's a show of confidence in one way, it's not completely, because by picking up the option, it's effectively a one-year deal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a stay of execution, so to speak. The curious thing is that he was up against Ocon for this seat. It creates that little bit of medium-term uncertainty, not just for Bottas, but for Mercedes as well.
Obviously, the fact that Lewis Hamilton is out of contract at the end of next year means there's lots of speculation about whether he'll continue. What do we infer from the decision to keep Bottas? Because clearly it's a very Hamilton-friendly decision. I remember when we looked into the case of Bottas versus Ocon in a previous video, one of the conclusions we drew was that if you were looking for the ideal Hamilton teammate, maybe Bottas is the guy. But if you were looking for a future star, perhaps you would go with Ocon.
I think it's a decision that benefits Mercedes in the short term, but does raise question marks in the medium term. I think what it does is that we know that by the end of 2020, Lewis Hamilton will or will not be continuing with Mercedes. So they've got one more year of the brilliance of Lewis Hamilton leading the team. So Bottas is there to make sure that Hamilton is at his best next year, and in a situation where he can pick up the pieces if Lewis isn't. So that doesn't mean that Bottas won't or can't fight for the title in 2020, but Mercedes is basically saying, okay, Lewis is our number one, we want a proper guy alongside him, not an explicit number two, but a de facto number two, and then we'll reassess our options after 2020. But it's difficult for Mercedes, because now if Hamilton walks away and Ocon's out of the family, Bottas isn't necessarily in a position to lead the team, because they keep erring. They're only giving him these one-year deals. Do they really have the faith in him? So it's kind of difficult. This is what I'm talking about, that short-term gain versus medium-term uncertainty. And I know that you sort of view it, I guess, as Bottas is an easy, obvious choice for 2020, but what the hell do they do after that?
Well, that's the big question. I would say they've got to be confident that Hamilton is going to remain with them long-term, or there's a good chance that he will. If not, they'd have to pick up someone like Max Verstappen, wouldn't they? So maybe that is an option as well. So perhaps Mercedes sees it as a way to align with the contract cycles of everyone else as well by giving Bottas a 1 year. But we do know how good Ocon is. We know Bottas' strengths. He's been very strong in qualifying. He's within a tenth on average of Hamilton. He's on average out-qualified Hamilton one time in three over their career together at Mercedes, which is pretty good. You can't really ask for more, can you? But we do know tyre management has been a little bit of a problem when the tyres are marginal. Wheel-to-wheel battle, he's not necessarily the strongest. So those are the downsides. So what do you think? Do you think Mercedes has made the right decision, or was it a mistake to go with what might be termed the easy option?
I think it's made the right decision for 2020, and I think that because there's uncertainty over what Lewis is going to do, maybe that's become the biggest point for Mercedes. They're going to have an extra challenge from Ferrari and Red Bull next year. So do they think that Bottas is capable of rising to that occasion and being good enough to fight Ferrari and Red Bull? And is he the best person to make sure that Hamilton's in the best state to take the fight to Ferrari and Red Bull? And they obviously think the answer to those two questions is yes. So I think they've just basically played their cards in a way that puts them in a strong position for next year. And then they'll assess what happens after that. I think you're right. They must have a decent indication that Lewis wants to stick around. or they must be really confident that George Russell will be in a position to step up in 2021, or that Verstappen will be available and they'll be able to prize him from Red Bull. So, like anything, it raises a few questions, but obviously it answers a very, very big one at the moment.